Morning, Trainiacs. Over the past year, even without what is going on in the world here in 2020, Ironman, the World Triathlon Corporation, formerly owned by Wanda Sports Group, has been, in the easiest way I can explain it, is flux. They IPO'd, then they were sold. They were potentially going to be taken over by the Triathletes Organization, and now races throughout the year are canceled all around the world. And with what's been going on with essentially the company that drives triathlon all around the world being so kind of contentious right now, I think it's at least worth analyzing how Ironman got to be where they are right now, where the risks and detriments are to us as athletes, and what we as athletes need to do. How do we respond to what's going on right now? Because it's a two-way street. Now, to understand where Ironman is right now, we've got to go back a little ways. And I think it starts in 2019 when the Wanda Sports Group, which is the company that owns Ironman, wanted to IPO. And at the time, I did an analysis of their SEC filing, which opened their kimono a little bit and let us in on the financial state of Ironman and the surrounding business for Wanda Sports Group. And at the time, I said that it really did not look like Ironman and Wanda Sports Group was a very good business. Like, it was just barely kind of hanging on. Unfortunately, the IPO went down as the second worst IPO of 2019. They raised only $190 million, which is less than half of what they intended to raise from the IPO, shortly after the stock had dropped 36%, and by now, today, the stock is down 58%. By all accounts, this is a very unsuccessful IPO, and this is essentially confirming what I looked at, is there was no demand to buy the company because it wasn't a very well-run company. After that, we started hearing announcements that the PTO, the Pro Triathletes Organization, was in a bid to purchase Ironman, and Ironman vehemently fought this. Eventually, the Ironman Group itself was sold to a company called Advance for $730 million. Advance did this purchase in conjunction. There were two companies that made the purchase of Ironman. So there was Advance, and alongside them was Orkila Capital. Now, who is Orkila Capital? Why is this all relevant, you might be asking? Well, this is very important to know because the managing director of Orkila Capital is a person named Jesse Dubé, who is also the managing director of Providence Equity Partners, which was the private equity company that originally owned Ironman Corporation, World Triathlon Corporation, back in 2008. And this is where a lot of the current problems of World Triathlon Corporation, Ironman, same sort of thing, originated from. What happened is that Providence Equity Partners, this private equity company that owned the Ironman company, ended up taking out a pile of debt, huge amounts of debt, hundreds of millions of dollars worth of debt, and saddled that with the company essentially to raise a whole bunch of debt to get money out of the company. So essentially, they were hampering the company for their own benefit. And that's all fine to do when you own the company. It's normal. But the downside to all this is that they took out so much debt that essentially Ironman Corporation, now World Triathlon Corporation, is still dealing with the repercussions of this debt. Just recently, Moody's, the rating agency that essentially says, well, how safe or unsafe is a company to invest in, reiterated that they are going to maintain a B2 credit rating for the Ironman Group. And this B2 credit rating is a credit rating that Egypt, Ethiopia, Costa Rica has. This is speculative grade. This is what, back when I was an investment advisor, I would look at as like, you do not touch that company because it has a high likelihood of actually going under. The exact term that Moody's used to describe it is speculative and high risk. So now we have this same individual who was willing to hurt the Ironman Group and the operations of Ironman to get private money out for their own company to the detriment of a healthy Ironman company now owns it again. And when we talked with Sam from the PTO, one of the leaders of that organization, I asked him in our podcast, I said, do the challenges of Ironman really all just boil down to the amount of debt that it's still carrying from years ago when Providence Equity Partners leveraged up the company as much as it possibly could, and everyone that's owned it since has just had to inherit that unfortunate financial state? And he said, yes, that's essentially what's happening. And then the second question of like, well, why did PTO want to buy it in the first place comes up. Well, then this goes back to essentially market forces. Ironman is basically a monopoly. Rev3 doesn't really exist. Challenge is making a really good run at competing with the Ironman Group, but they're very much like a definite 1 and 2 option. And because Ironman is so far ahead of every single other race organization out there, it's largely a monopoly. It drives triathlon all around the world. And when you have a company that is a monopoly and there isn't a legitimate challenger out there that is really taking market share away, you end up with a company that isn't necessarily going to operate in the best interest of its customers. And I'm going to give you an example. There's a story that I know of where a friend of mine was in a race, ended up being kind of woozy, kind of passed out, but really wanted to finish the race. And instead, what happened was the med tent people pinned her down forcibly, so much so that she had grass burns all over her body to give her an IV injection. Now, when she went back to Ironman Corporation and talked about how this wasn't the way that she or anyone should be treated, what they said was, well, it's not our responsibility to provide medical assistance to athletes. That's up to the race to do that. You should bring that up with the race director. Then when it was brought up with the race director said, well, actually, with most Ironman races, the medical supervision is offloaded to Red Cross. And if you want to win a court battle with the Red Cross, good luck to you. So at every point along the way, they've all offloaded responsibility, and it leads to these scenarios that over and over we hear these scenarios where athletes don't feel like they're treated very well. Personally, I've experienced this. Last year in 2019, when we went to Kona, we found out just days before the race that we couldn't actually post a Kona video. Nobody told us this until we were actually there. That's not a way to treat a media partner. That's a bit of a kick in the pills. In addition to that, what they're also doing is they've recently given me, I don't know if I should say it, but they've given me one of these on one of my videos about the Ironman Kona race, where I used some footage that they supplied me to use for the coverage of that race as a media partner, and they claimed that I was committing copyright infringement even though I used footage that they supplied me to use. And when I approached them about this, because this is a really bad thing for a channel to encounter, they wouldn't even respond to my email. This after I promoted their races, after I, at their request, promoted their charities, and they don't even give me a response. So there's lots of little instances like this popping up. Where this leads us to today is that, of course, they're hurting financially. And then they go into lockdown where all of a sudden, the main revenue source that they've had, races, are canceled. But the vast majority of those races had many race entries in them to prop up their revenue. The downside to what they've been doing is if you take a look at what they've been doing with cancellations, postponements, or even just communicating with athletes, they've been waiting, in many cases, right up until 45 days before the event, at which point they don't have to give one dime of refunds to athletes before they give anyone any sort of guidance. And you might be saying, well, they could just be, taking it day by day, but there are instances where certain counties are saying for a fact they will not sanction any race until the end of August. And the races that are in August that Ironman is holding in those counties, they're still saying, well, we're taking it day by day. How are you taking it day by day when the county itself has already announced that they're not going to sanction your race? What do? Wait until 45 days beforehand and then say, oh, we can't hold the race. you knew that. I've been asked a lot about how I feel about the Ironman VR series. I think it's fantastic that they're giving people an option to race, and the people that I hear going into it are very, very motivated by it. That is excellent. However, when they are starting to lure in athletes saying that you can qualify for world championships with these VR races, when they really have no controls, I mean, we have heard confirmed facts that for a 90 or a 40 kilometer bike, I can't remember which it was, they were getting driven to the top of the hill and then bombing down at like 30 miles an hour, and that gets uploaded as a legitimate time. And here are people that are qualifying for world championships, or people are missing out on world championships while this is happening. It just kind of seems like they're maybe in the spirit of making money as opposed to giving the athletes a good experience. Now, I don't really have anything that we can do about this because it's a bit of a double-edged sword. On the one hand, there are all of these small annoyances. On the other hand, I believe that Ironman changes lives. It changed my life. The Ironman Kona broadcast is what got me into the sport. And it's what gets a lot of you into the sport and changes a lot of your lives. And it's fantastic for that. And a healthy Ironman group means a healthy triathlon sport in general, all around the world. So are there things to retaliate for? Frankly, I don't think that that's the right answer. I just wish that Ironman was a little bit more open with all of us so that we could root for them. So that's what I've got. A little bit of a State of the Union address. In the end, we need a healthy Ironman group. So food for thought. If you aren't already subscribed and you're interested in more just triathlon talk, gossip, news, training, tips, gear reviews, hit the subscribe button below. Plenty of videos for you. A couple that you can watch there and there. Later, Trainiacs.